My name is Julia Monroe, and just 1 month after bringing a human life into the world, with my body still torn, my mind still fogged, and my nights stolen by a crying infant, my husband asked me, "So when are you planning to go back to work?" Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The pain was still raw. Not just the physical kind, though, that lingered too sharp and insistent every time I stood, sat, or moved in the wrong way. The kind of pain that reminded you your body had cracked open to make room for someone else's life. But there was another pain, quieter, deeper, harder to name, that had started growing inside me since I'd brought Ava home. Mark and I had been married 4 years. On the outside, we looked like any picture-perfect couple. 2 decent jobs, a neat house in the suburbs, 2 cars, 1 dog, and now 1 baby. I thought Ava's birth would bring us closer, that Mark would see this as the next step in our shared dream. Instead, I started realizing something bone-deep and terrifying. This dream might have only ever been mine. It started one afternoon, about 4 weeks after my emergency C-section. I was trying to nap while Ava slept in the bassinet next to me. My body still felt foreign, stitched, swollen, drained. But in that thin window of peace, I let myself close my eyes. That's when Mark walked in, rubbing his hands with a towel like he'd just finished something productive. So he said, casual, like he was asking about the weather, "Have you thought about when you're going back to work?" I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "Work," I said. He shrugged. "Yeah, like your job." Maternity leave is what, 6 weeks? Technically, but I'm still recovering. Ava's still nursing every 2 hours. I can barely sit without pain. He nodded, but I could already see him retreating, that glazed-over look he got when he thought I was being dramatic. "I just thought we should start planning," he said. "It's not like we can live off one income forever." That moment was so quiet, no shouting, no accusations, but something in it cracked me wide open. I had given birth alone in a cold, sterile OR while he waited in the hallway because he couldn't handle blood. I had changed every diaper tracked, every feeding endured, every sleepless night. He had gone back to work within 5 days, complaining of how tired he was. Now, barely 4 weeks in, he was already asking when I'd go back to being a full-time employee, like the last month had been a sabbatical. "I'm not ready," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You'll never feel ready," he replied. "That's the trap. You just gotta push through it. That's what my mom says." There it was again, his mother. Judith was a relic of another era, the kind of woman who never stopped reminding me she worked full-time while raising 3 kids and had dinner on the table by 6. She'd made it clear she thought I was soft. That being a stay-at-home mom, even temporarily, was a sign of weakness. She also didn't have a C-section and a baby who wakes up screaming every 90 minutes, I muttered. Mark didn't hear me, or didn't want to. He was already walking away, back to his laptop, back to his spreadsheets, leaving me with the weight of the question he'd just dropped like a brick on my chest. I looked over at Ava, her tiny hands twitching in her sleep. Was I overreacting? Was I too emotional? That's what everyone says, right? New moms are hormonal. Delicate, sensitive. Maybe I was imagining the indifference in his voice. Maybe he wasn't trying to dismiss my pain. Maybe he was just being practical. Logical. But even as I tried to excuse it, the truth was already tightening its grip around my ribs. He didn't see me. Not the way I saw him, not as a partner navigating the most vulnerable stage of life, but as a resource, a contributor, an asset who had stopped producing and now needed to get back to her function. I couldn't sleep that night. Ava cried at 12:40 a.m., and I staggered out of bed to soothe her, while Mark snored on his side, earplugs firmly in place. At 2:15, she needed to nurse. I sat up in bed, back aching, eyes raw, and fed her with one hand while scrolling through job boards on my phone just to see what was even possible. At 4:00, I cried in the bathroom while brushing my teeth, brushing too hard just to feel something. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision not to go back to work, but to pay attention. If Mark could treat me like this 1 month after birth, what did that say about the years ahead? This wasn't just one conversation. This was the first clue in a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. And soon I would uncover every ugly piece. Mark didn't bring it up again the next day. Instead, he walked around like nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just asked his wife, whose body still bore stitches and stretch marks, to suit up and clock in, like it was just another Tuesday. He kissed my forehead that morning while I was changing Ava's diaper and said, "You're doing great," like a boss giving a pep talk before another shift. And maybe that's what I was to him now, a tired employee in our house-shaped workplace. The idea festered in my head all morning. I tried to let it go. I tried to believe in the best version of him, the version I thought I'd married. The man who used to make me tea when I was grading papers late into the night. Who wrote me a silly poem the day I told him I was pregnant. Who said things like, "You're going to be the most amazing mom." That man felt like a stranger now. Or maybe a memory I'd invented. By noon, I was standing at the sink washing bottles when I realized I hadn't sat down all morning. Ava had refused to nap. The breast pump was already whirring in the background for the third time, and I hadn't even gotten to eat the breakfast I'd made 3 hours earlier. That's when Mark walked in from his home office and said, "Hey, I know today's been a lot, but do you think you could run to the store later? We're out of paper towels." I dried my hands and looked at him. "No," I said simply. He blinked. "What do you mean no? I mean no. I haven't sat down in 6 hours. Ava hasn't slept. I haven't eaten. I'm bleeding through another pad. You have a car. You go." The silence that followed was thick and sour. Mark stared at me like I had grown a second head. Then he raised his hands in surrender and walked back to his office muttering, "Wow, okay." That's when it hit me. He genuinely believed this was supposed to be equal. That me home on maternity leave meant I was resting like I was on some extended vacation. That he had to pull more weight because I wasn't bringing home a paycheck right now. That the fact I wasn't clocking in made all of this, the diapers, the night feeds, the body pain, invisible. That night, he fell asleep on the couch. I stood in the hallway for a long time just watching him, listening to Ava cry upstairs, wondering when he had stopped hearing her. Or maybe he still heard her, and simply chose not to respond. The next morning, I tried to talk to him again. I thought maybe if I could explain it right, he'd understand. "I'm still healing, Mark. Not just physically. It's overwhelming. My hormones, the sleep deprivation. I'm not okay." He nodded slowly, then leaned back and said, "That's why I think work might help. Give you structure again. You'll feel more normal." "Normal," I repeated. "Yeah. Like a break from all this baby stuff." He said it so sincerely, so cluelessly that it almost made me laugh. Almost. Ava stirred in my arms. I looked down at her flushed cheeks, her tiny hands curled into fists. I thought of the night feeds, the doctor visits, the long hours rocking her until my arms went numb. The love that burned through the fog of exhaustion like fire in my veins. And I realized he saw this baby as my job. Not ours. Mine. When I didn't answer, he continued, "I mean, I'm not saying full-time. Just part-time. Maybe even freelance. I saw you used to do some editing, right? Or tutoring." I wanted to scream, but I just nodded and said, "Sure, I'll think about it." Because arguing with him was like explaining color to someone who only saw black and white. That afternoon, Judith called. She always had a way of making her check-ins feel like interviews, like I had to prove something to her. "How's little Ava sleeping through the night yet?" "Not quite. She's only a month old." I suppose you're still taking it easy." Then I paused. "I'm on maternity leave." "Oh, of course, of course. Back in my day, I was back to work after 4 weeks. Couldn't afford not to. But things are different now. More flexible." There it was. Judith had a talent for saying things that sounded supportive but carried a poison-tipped barb. I mumbled something polite and hung up shortly after. Then I sat on the couch, staring into nothing, Ava on my chest, both of us breathing unevenly. I wasn't imagining it. This was real. They had decided quietly without consulting me that I was supposed to bounce back. Be resilient. Be grateful. Get over it. But motherhood isn't something you bounce back from. It changes your bones, your brain, your sleep, your soul. It dismantles you and slowly rebuilds you into someone else. And that someone else was now realizing she was very, very alone. That night, Ava wouldn't stop crying. I had done everything, fed, changed, rocked her. Nothing worked. Mark stayed in the bedroom, headphones in, not even curious. So I paced the hallway, heart-pounding, tears threatening to spill. It was 3 a.m. when she finally fell asleep in my arms. I collapsed into the rocking chair and closed my eyes, my whole body aching. And I whispered into the dark, "You deserve better, little girl." And so do I. That was the first time I admitted it out loud. Not just that I was tired, not just that I was overwhelmed, but that I was angry. And that anger was starting to bloom into something stronger, something that would carry me toward the truth and eventually toward freedom. Ava's cries pierced through the walls again. It was just past midnight and I was already on my third trip out of bed. The room was dim lit only by the soft nightlight I kept by the crib. My breasts were sore, my back ached, and my knees felt like they'd aged 20 years. Still, I moved toward her like I always did, half asleep, driven by something deeper than instinct, something that felt like devotion mixed with desperation. I picked her up and held her close to my chest. Her little body trembled, and I hummed low like I had read somewhere that babies recognize their mother's voice before anything else. The warmth of her skin calmed me a little. Just a little. Mark didn't move. He hadn't stirred the last few nights. Even when Ava's cries reached a fever pitch, he remained a statue on his side of the bed, sometimes with earplugs in, sometimes with his AirPods in, listening to podcasts to help him fall asleep. I rocked back and forth on the edge of the bed and watched him. This man who used to touch my stomach when she kicked and whisper, "We're going to be amazing parents." This man who once cried during a diaper commercial because it reminded him of the future. This man now didn't even flinch when his daughter screamed 2 feet from his ear. And me, I was crumbling. My hands shook with exhaustion. My mind buzzed with self-doubt. Was I doing something wrong? Why wasn't Ava sleeping like other babies seem to? Why did everything hurt so much? Was I not strong enough? Then a darker question surfaced. Was I becoming someone even I didn't recognize? Ava finally drifted off in my arms, her breath catching slightly as she nuzzled closer. I laid her gently back down, kissed her tiny forehead, and stumbled back into the hallway. Instead of going to bed, I stood there, staring at the closed door to our bedroom. I thought about walking in, lying down, and pretending everything was okay again. But I couldn't. My feet didn't move. Instead, I went to the kitchen. I opened the fridge not because I was hungry, but because I needed the light, some proof the world was still spinning, that I wasn't completely adrift. I grabbed a bottle of water, took a long sip, and leaned on the counter with both hands. My reflection in the microwave door startled me. Sunken eyes, chapped lips, shadows where light used to be. I whispered to the reflection, "This isn't sustainable." That moment should have felt empowering, but it didn't. It felt like a quiet defeat. The next morning, Mark was already dressed for work when I came downstairs with Ava. He poured himself coffee and said, "Hey, can you wash my blue shirt today? I need it for tomorrow's meeting." Not a word about the night. Not a glance toward the baby. Not even a, "How are you?" "I'll try," I said without thinking. Then I caught myself. No, I wouldn't try. I was already trying. Trying to heal. trying to survive, trying to love a baby who needed more than my body could currently give, trying to not fall apart. I looked at him and said, "Actually, no, I'm not doing laundry today." He turned. "Why not?" "Because I'm not okay, Mark. And you haven't asked. Not once." His expression shifted defensive, annoyed. "What do you want me to say? I'm working 10-hour days. I'm stressed too. We both have things to deal with. You get lunch breaks, you get adult conversation, you get to finish a sentence without being interrupted by a baby screaming. I haven't even showered in 3 days." He scoffed. "You're making it sound like I'm the enemy here." "I don't need an enemy," I said quietly. "I need a partner." We stood in silence. Ava stirred in my arms and I rocked her gently as the distance between us widened. He left without another word. Later that day, I texted my sister Rachel. "Me, can I call you?" She responded almost immediately. "Rachel, yes. FaceTime." I hesitated. Did I want her to see me like this pale, puffy-eyed hair a mess? But something in me needed to be seen, really seen. I hit accept. Her face appeared smiling, warm, familiar. But the smile faded as soon as she saw me. "Oh, Jules?" "I'm fine," I said automatically. "No, you're not." "What's going on?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. I didn't know where to begin. Then, like someone opened a floodgate, it all came rushing out. The night cries, Mark's distance, the comment about going back to work, Judith's constant undermining. By the end, Rachel looked stunned and angry. "You can't stay like this," she said. "You're not okay. This is how women lose themselves." "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do. Come stay here. Even for a weekend. Bring Ava. I'll help. You can sleep. We can talk. I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. You're asking for help. And you need it. You deserve it." I started to cry. Not the kind of cry that builds and crashes. It was softer. A steady, exhausted leak. "I'm so tired, Rach." "I know, babe. But you're not alone." That night, I brought it up to Mark. "I want to go stay with Rachel for a couple days." He barely looked up from his laptop. "Why?" "Because I'm overwhelmed. Because I need help." "Because you're not hearing me." He frowned. "Is this about me asking about work again?" "It's about everything." He shook his head. "I just think you're letting it get to you too much. You need to toughen up." That was it. That was the sentence that cracked the glass I'd been trying to hold together. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded. And that night, while he slept, I began quietly packing Ava's things. I didn't leave just yet, but I was already preparing. Emotionally, mentally. It wasn't just about going to my sister's house. It was about starting to imagine a life where I didn't have to beg for understanding. A life where I didn't carry the entire weight of motherhood alone while being made to feel lazy or ungrateful. A life where Ava would grow up seeing strength not just in silence, but in action. I tucked her in that night and whispered, "Mama's figuring it out, baby girl. I promise." And for the first time in weeks, I let myself believe it. I didn't go to Rachel's the next day. Not because I changed my mind, but because I wanted to watch. Watch Mark. Observe. Understand the man I'd spent the last 5 years of my life loving. The man who once whispered, "Whatever happens, we're in this together," as he held a sonogram photo with tears in his eyes. Maybe I was trying to give him one last chance. Or maybe I just needed to see clearly what had been right in front of me this whole time. Ava was having a rare, calm day. For the first time in weeks, she napped twice and didn't fight her bottle. I actually managed to sit down with a hot cup of tea, and for a brief, quiet moment, it almost felt like peace. Then Mark came home. He walked in the door with a plastic shopping bag, tossed it on the kitchen counter, and said, "Can you make sure to meal prep some stuff for the week? I don't want to keep eating out." No kiss. No. "Hey, how's Ava?" No, "How are you holding up?" Just that. Like I was the housekeeper. I looked down at Ava sleeping on my chest in her soft cloud-patterned onesie and felt a slow fire spread in my chest. Later that evening, while I was folding a small mountain of laundry, Mark came into the room and leaned in the doorway. "Listen," he said, arms crossed. "I talked to my mom, and she agrees that working again would probably help you. You need to be around adults." I stared at him. He really thought this was about being bored. "Working outside the home won't fix this, Mark." "What will then?" he asked, exasperated. "Because honestly, Jules, I'm getting tired of this tension. It's like you're mad all the time." "I'm not mad," I said. "I'm drowning." He blinked, clearly thrown off. I continued, my voice low and steady. "Do you know I still have stitches that haven't dissolved? Do you know I cry every time I pump milk because my nipples are raw? That I haven't slept for more than 3 hours at a time in a month? That when I walk past mirrors, I don't recognize myself? That I constantly worry that if I don't love Ava enough, she'll sense it?" Mark was silent. "You ask me to go to work like I'm just lounging around here. You act like my exhaustion is a personality flaw. You don't ask about the baby. You don't ask about me." He shifted awkwardly. "You're not the only tired one, Julia. I work full-time. I provide for us." "No. We both provide. I provide in ways you don't even see. I provide with my body, my energy, my sanity. I provide every single minute I keep our child alive while you sleep through her cries." He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "I'm not interested in what your mother thinks I should be doing. She raised a man who believes this is partnership. That says enough." He frowned. "Don't bring my mom into this." "She's already in it," I said coldly. "Because you put her there." Ava stirred in her bassinet. I stood and walked to her, gently placing a hand on her chest to soothe her. "I'm staying with Rachel for a few days," I said. Mark's voice was sharp. "Why?" "Because I need support. And because if I don't get some distance, I'm going to lose what little of myself I have left." "That's dramatic." "No," I whispered. "What's dramatic is thinking a bleeding, exhausted woman should toughen up instead of being cared for." He didn't stop me. He didn't offer to help pack. He didn't apologize. He just said, "Let me know when you're coming back." Rachel opened the door before I even knocked. Her arms wrapped around me so tightly I nearly crumpled. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to be held, not just physically but emotionally. To feel someone say, "I see you," without words. Her house smelled like vanilla and clean laundry. She had already set up a quiet space in the guest room with a bassinet and fresh linens. "You're staying as long as you need," she said. "No pressure. Just peace." For the next few days, I breathed. Really breathed. Rachel helped with feeds, burping, diapers. She held Ava while I took long hot showers and even naps. She fed me. She asked how I was and waited for real answers. One night over tea, she said, "You know, I never liked how Mark talked about parenting before Ava was born." I looked up. "What do you mean he kept calling it a team effort?" "But every example he gave sounded like you doing all the work and him helping out, occasionally. Like parenting was a hobby for him." I nodded. "I thought maybe he'd learn once she was here. Some people don't want to learn. They want the credit without the work." Mark texted the next day. "Mark, just checking in. Hope Ava's okay." That was it. Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just a check-in, like we were divorced co-parents on formal terms. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I watched Rachel's husband come home from work, kiss her on the forehead, and immediately take their toddler into his arms with joy. Later, he walked past me and said, "Let me know if I can help with Ava tonight." I nearly cried, because he wasn't even my husband, and yet in that moment he made me feel more supported than the man I married. I realized something critical that night. It's not the big gestures that build or break a relationship, it's the daily evidence of presence, of effort, of care. Mark had stopped showing up long ago. A few more days passed. Rachel and I laughed again. I began to journal. I started feeling my thoughts stretch beyond Ava's schedule, thoughts about me, my dreams, my anger, my needs, about who I was before the bleeding and the sleep loss and the silence. Then one morning, Rachel walked into the room with her phone in her hand. "He just called me." I turned. "Mark." She nodded. "He wants to talk." I took a deep breath. "Let him come," I said. "But I'm not pretending anymore." Mark arrived that evening. He brought flowers. I didn't smile. He looked tired, maybe even guilty, but I wasn't interested in his sadness unless it came with growth. He sat across from me while Ava slept in her bassinet. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, "and I didn't realize how much I've let you carry." I waited. I thought I was helping by working, but I was blind. I didn't get it. "No," I said. "You didn't want to get it." He flinched. "I wanted praise for being the provider. I resented you for not bouncing back. I I didn't even try to understand what you were going through." I crossed my arms. "You saw me break and called it drama." "I know. I'm sorry. Words aren't enough anymore," I said softly. "I'm not angry because I expected perfection. I'm angry because I was invisible." Mark's shoulders slumped. "I don't want to lose you." "You already lost pieces of me," I said. "But whether you lose the rest depends on whether you're willing to do the work now, not for praise, not for performance, but because it's right." He nodded, eyes glossy. "I'm going to stay a little longer," I added. "Not to punish you, to protect myself. For how long, I'll know when it's time." That night, Ava stirred again, and as I held her in the quiet room, I felt something shift. A boundary, a voice, a beginning. I stayed at Rachel's for another week. Every morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window instead of the blue glare of Mark's cold indifference. Rachel would already have the kettle on, the smell of ginger tea floating through the air. Ava slept better in the guest room than she ever had at home. Maybe it was the energy. Maybe it was me. I had stopped bracing for disappointment. One morning, as I was burping Ava on my lap, Rachel sat across from me with her arms folded and said, "So, what are you going to do when you go back? I don't know yet." "I think you do." I met her eyes, because the truth was I had started imagining it, not just going back home, but going back different, not quieter, not more understanding of Mark, not more patient with his excuses. I was imagining walking in with new terms, with a voice I wouldn't smother again. "I don't want to leave him," I said honestly. "But I also don't want to live the way I was." "Then don't." Rachel's words were so simple, so certain. I wasn't sure I had the courage yet, but I was starting to believe I deserved to try. That night, Mark called again. I answered. His voice was soft, controlled. "I miss you. I miss Ava. I cleaned the house, did laundry. I've been thinking about you." He paused. "I didn't realize how lonely it must have felt for you." I listened. "I've been reading stuff about postpartum, about how partners can do better." "I didn't know, but I'm trying now. Trying's not enough if you're only doing it because I left." "I get that. Do you?" "I think so. I'm not asking you to rush back. I want to show you I can be the person you needed from the beginning." I stayed quiet. "I want to try," he added. "You can try from there. I'll come home when it's right." "I understand." That was the first time in weeks I felt him see me, not just need me. 2 days later, I packed our bags. Not because I had forgiven everything, but because I believed I had changed. The Julia that left home wasn't the same Julia coming back. Rachel hugged me tight. "You know I'm always here, right? Always. Don't forget who you are when you walk back into that house." "I won't." Walking through the front door felt strange. The floors were clean, the counters wiped. A vase of fresh flowers, lilies my favorite, sat on the table. A baby swing we hadn't bought yet was assembled in the living room. Mark came out of the kitchen, apron on, hands flour dusted. He looked surprised to see me. "I didn't think you'd come today. I needed to see if this was real," I said. He nodded, stepping aside as I walked in. Ava stirred in her carrier and he leaned over, gently brushing a kiss across her forehead. "You look tired," I said. "I am," he admitted, "but in a good way. Like I finally understand what you were doing alone." He motioned toward the kitchen. "I made dinner. Did Judith help you?" He shook his head. "No, I haven't called her all week." That surprised me. I needed to stop letting her be my voice. I set down the baby bag. We stood in silence. "Can we sit?" he asked. I nodded. We sat on the couch, not touching, just present. "I've been a coward," he said after a while. "I thought if I ignored how hard it was for you, I wouldn't feel guilty for not helping." "I didn't need you to be perfect," I said. "I needed you to try before I broke." He swallowed hard. "I'm ready to try now," he whispered. "I want to be in this fully." The next week was different. Not perfect, but different. Mark woke for some of Ava's nighttime feedings, fumbled through diaper changes, held her longer, sang to her in that off-key hum I once fell in love with. He asked how I was. He actually waited for answers. I saw him trying. And that made space in me soften. One night, while Ava was finally asleep and the house was still, he said, "Thank you for not giving up on me. I almost did." "I know." He took my hand. "I'm not just trying to get back to where we were," he said. "I want us to be something better." I didn't cry. I didn't melt. But I held his hand back. Because I believed him. For the first time in a long time. And I believed in myself more. Because I had finally done what so many women are told not to. I left before I lost myself. A few days after I returned home, I got a call from Judith. I had been feeding Ava in the quiet of the early morning. The phone buzzed against the table like an insect, persistent and sharp. I hesitated before answering. "Julia," she said immediately. "I heard you were at Rachel's." There was no warmth, just accusation tucked behind feigned concern. "Yes," I said plainly. "Is everything all right?" "Mark hasn't said much." "Everything is fine now." She paused. "You know I understand how overwhelming things can be for new mothers. But disappearing like that, it's a bit extreme, don't you think?" I blinked. "Disappearing, I didn't disappear, Judith. I stepped away to protect myself and my daughter." Another pause. She wasn't expecting a voice with steel. "You could have just asked for help." "I did," I said. "Many times. You just didn't want to hear what I needed, you wanted to decide for me." Judith's tone hardened. "You young women these days, always making everything a crisis." "I wasn't having a crisis," I said calmly. "I was being ignored. There's a difference." That ended the conversation. I didn't feel guilty for the first time in months. I felt like I had finally closed a door that should have never been open in the first place. The days that followed brought something new between Mark and me, not passion, not romance, but an awkward, fragile honesty. He started taking paternity leave finally. I hadn't even known it was an option. Apparently, his company offered it and he'd just never bothered to apply, because he thought it wouldn't be necessary. Now he was present in the room, in the diaper changes, in the middle of the night cries. One night, as we both sat in silence, rocking Ava between us, he said I didn't apply for leave because I thought it would make me look weak. Weak to who, I asked. He shrugged. My boss, my team, my mom. I smiled bitterly. And what about how I looked crying in the kitchen, limping after a C-section, trying to stay awake with cracked nipples and a newborn screaming in my arms? Mark looked down at his hands. I never thought of that. That's the problem. He didn't argue, he didn't defend, he just nodded. Slowly, we began to move differently. Mark cooked without being asked. He made lists, took Ava for walks so I could shower in peace. He even joined me at a postpartum group session, mostly women, one terrified young dad and Mark sitting awkwardly in the back until someone invited him into the circle. Afterward in the car, he said, "I didn't know people talked about this stuff." I turned to him. "It's only invisible to the people who refuse to look." I was one of them. He said it with shame, but I didn't offer comfort. I let him sit in it, because that discomfort was part of the work. Still, something inside me didn't fully settle. One afternoon, while Ava napped and the house was quiet, I pulled out a notebook. The same one I'd used for my work notes before maternity leave. I turned the page. And for the first time in a long time, I wrote for myself. Not to plan feedings or track pumping times or write lists for Mark. I wrote, "I deserve a life where I'm seen, not just needed. I deserve partnership, not praise, for enduring more than I should. I am still here, bruised, tired, but here." And with that, I began reclaiming a piece of myself. That evening, I told Mark I was considering therapy. "Postpartum?" he asked. "No," I said. "For everything. For before Ava. For us." He didn't look surprised. "I'll go too," he said. "If you want." "I want you to want to go." He was quiet. "Then I want to go." In our first couples session, the therapist asked, "When did you first feel unheard?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't find a beginning. I think I said it started when I told Mark I was pregnant, and his first reaction was fear, not joy. Mark looked over stunned. "It wasn't about him being scared," I continued. "It was about how quickly I swallowed my own emotions to comfort his." The therapist nodded. That became the pattern. I reassured him when he felt lost. I minimized my pain to keep peace. I downplayed my exhaustion to avoid guilt-tripping him. Mark was silent, then whispered, "I thought I was being honest." "You were," I said. "But honesty isn't the same as care." He reached for my hand. This time I didn't pull away. I held it. Because this was different. This wasn't the Mark who needed me quiet to feel in control. This was the Mark who was finally learning to listen. And maybe we still had something worth saving. The hardest part about healing isn't the pain, it's the silence that follows once you've said everything that needed to be said. The quiet after confrontation. The stillness after the storm. That's where we were now. There were no more outbursts. No more midnight arguments or slammed doors. Just quiet and questions. Can you really rebuild after such a fracture? Or do you simply learn to walk on the cracks more carefully? Mark and I had settled into something that looked like peace. He woke early. He changed diapers without being asked. He even researched sleep training, and we argued over Ferber versus no-cry methods like any tired, determined new parents. But the truth was, I still didn't fully trust him. Not yet. I didn't know if the man I loved, the one who had held me close when we found out we were pregnant, who'd whispered promises against my belly at night, was still in there. And more frightening, I didn't know if I was still in there. One morning, I watched Ava on the playmat while Mark sat cross-legged beside her, clapping his hands, mimicking baby sounds. She giggled a sound like wind chimes, and my chest ached. He was trying, but trying wasn't the same as understanding. That afternoon, we sat down together. No distractions, no baby on our laps, just us. "I've been thinking about work," I said carefully. Mark tensed. "I'm not saying I want to go back right now. I'm saying I want to think about what I want. And not just because of money or because people expect it or because your mother keeps making comments." He nodded slowly. "Okay, I need to find myself again. I need to know who I am beyond being a mother. That doesn't make me selfish." "I never said you were." "No, but your silence screamed it." He flinched. I deserve that. I'm saying this because if we're going to make it, I can't be the only one rediscovering herself. He looked at me and asked something that surprised me. What do you want, Julia? I swallowed hard. It was the first time in months, maybe longer, that someone asked me that without expecting the answer to benefit them. I want to write again, I said. Not just memos or project updates. I want to write like I used to before all of this. He nodded. Then write. That night, after Ava went down, I opened my laptop. I stared at the blank page. For 10 minutes, then 20. My fingers trembled slightly as they hovered above the keys. And then, I wrote one sentence. She used to be a woman who waited for permission. And then another. Now she wrote because the world had stopped asking how she felt. And just like that, the fog began to lift. A week later, I shared the short piece with Rachel. She called me 5 minutes after I sent it. Julia, you still have it. Her voice cracked. You are still in there. I laughed softly. I wasn't sure. You're not allowed to forget again, she said. And if you do, I'll remind you. Every time. Mark had been true to his word for the most part. He stepped up not perfectly, but consistently. There were still stumbles, like the day he told his mom she could come over just for a little while without asking me first, but he caught himself quicker now. He noticed the way I stiffened. He noticed. And he apologized. Judith didn't stay long. I was polite, firm, and detached. She brought a onesie that read, "Daddy's Little Princess." I thanked her and put it away in a drawer we never opened again. She must have sensed the change. I wasn't someone she could push anymore. At therapy, our counselor said something that stuck with me. Sometimes it's not about rebuilding the old house. Sometimes it's about clearing the land and deciding what kind of foundation you want next. That night, I asked Mark, "Do you love me?" He didn't hesitate. Yes. Do you love who I am now? Or do you miss the woman who said yes to everything just to keep peace? He paused. Then he said the most honest thing he'd ever told me. I loved her because she made my life easier. But I love you more now because you make our life real. I looked at him. And for the first time in months, I saw him. Not the man I married. Not the man I resented. But someone in between, growing, failing, trying, loving, and that made me realize something. Maybe healing isn't about returning to who we were before the pain. Maybe it's about becoming someone stronger because of it. It was early spring when I took Ava to the park alone for the first time since everything fell apart. The cherry blossoms had started blooming, soft petals tumbling down like snow, dusting the edges of the baby stroller as I walked beneath the trees. I wasn't dressed up, but I wasn't hiding anymore either. No dark sunglasses, no oversized hoodie. Just me, a light cardigan, and the fresh air. Ava blinked up at the sky, tiny fingers grasping at the floating petals. Her laugh, high-pitched, unexpected, startled a smile out of me. I sat on the nearest bench, pulled out my notebook, and wrote, "There is a kind of peace that comes only after you've been broken, not before." I didn't realize I was crying until a mother nearby handed me a tissue. She smiled in a quiet, knowing way. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Sometimes women recognize each other's silence more than their words. That night, I told Mark I was applying for a part-time writing fellowship. His eyebrows rose, but he didn't question it. "That's amazing," he said. "What's it for essays?" "Motherhood. Identity. Real life." He smiled. "Sounds like your voice." It felt strange to be supported without explanation. Strange in a good way. I submitted the application 2 days later. I didn't even tell Rachel until after I hit send. "I'm proud of you," she said when I called. "Not for the application, for the fact that you did something for you without asking anyone if it was okay." Her words stayed with me, because for so long I'd waited for permission from people who never knew what I truly needed. Now I was finally granting it to myself. But healing doesn't erase history. One evening, we were visiting Mark's father, a kind man, distant but gentle. Judith, of course, was there too. I carried Ava in and greeted her with a polite nod. Judith gave me the once-over. "Back to work already, I hear." I didn't flinch. "No," I said calmly. "Just writing. Reclaiming my time." She laughed sharp and brittle. "You young mothers always need so much balance." I looked her straight in the eye. "I think what we need is support. But when we don't get it, we find balance on our own." The room went quiet. Mark didn't interrupt. He let me speak. Later in the car, he reached for my hand. "I'm sorry she never knew how to love you properly." I nodded. "I don't need her to anymore." That weekend, Mark surprised me. A printed email sat on the kitchen table. "Congratulations, you've been selected for our Spring Voices residency." I blinked. I hadn't even seen the email yet. He grinned like a child. "I hacked your inbox." "You what?" He laughed. "Okay, not hacked. You left it open." I stared at the paper, stunned. "I got in." "You did," he said. "You really did." I looked at him. "It's in upstate New York." "I know. It's for 2 weeks." "I know that too. I'd have to leave." Mark stepped closer, placed his hands on my shoulders. "Then go." "What about Ava?" "I'll take care of her." "We'll be fine." Tears sprang up before I could stop them. Because that was the first time since she was born that someone told me I could leave and be trusted. That I could go, not as a mother escaping, but as a woman choosing. I left 2 weeks later. Rachel drove me to the train station. I held Ava longer than I planned to kiss her cheeks until she squirmed and grabbed my nose with her tiny fists. Mark hugged me with one arm and took my bag with the other. "Call me every day," I said. "I will. Send me photos." Already cued. He kissed my forehead and said, "Come back new." The train ride was quiet. I watched the world blur past trees and houses, glimpses of people in backyards or waiting on platforms. I thought about who I was becoming. I wasn't someone's daughter-in-law anymore. Not someone's fragile wife. Not a woman swallowed by postpartum silence. I was a woman who had walked away and found her way back on her own terms. I wrote the first full essay of the fellowship that night. Motherhood didn't break me. Silence did. And reclaiming my voice wasn't a rebellion, it was survival. When I returned home, Mark looked tired but proud. Ava reached for me immediately, her face lighting up like sunrise. "Did you miss me?" I whispered, pressing her close. She babbled something that sounded like mama, and it nearly split me in two. That night, after she was asleep, Mark said I didn't do everything right. But I did it. And I think I finally understand what it means to show up. I smiled softly. "So do I." We sat in silence for a while. Then I said, "This doesn't mean everything's perfect." "I know. It just means I believe we're both willing to keep becoming better." He nodded. And that was enough. For now. The pale morning light filtered softly through the curtains as I sat cradling Ava in my arms, the rhythmic sound of her breathing a fragile comfort against the storm that still raged inside me. It had been months since she was born, yet the exhaustion, both physical and emotional, clung to me like a shadow that refused to lift. The days blended into a relentless cycle of feeding, soothing, and barely sleeping, while beneath the surface, a question gnawed at me relentlessly. Am I enough? This question haunted me more than any sleepless night or ache in my body. Not because I doubted my love for Ava that was fierce, undeniable, the kind of love that burns through every fiber of your being, but because the love I craved most from Mark, from my family, from myself, often felt distant, conditional, fragile. In the silence of that quiet morning, I realized how deeply isolated I had become. Therapy had been a lifeline, Rachel's support a balm, but sometimes even the best intentions couldn't fill the hollow spaces left by years of unmet needs and unspoken disappointments. I felt like I was navigating a ship in fog, unsure of the shore or even the direction. Later that day, the phone rang, breaking the stillness. It was my mother's voice, tentative, softer than I remembered. "Julia, darling, I've been thinking about you." Her words trembled with something unfamiliar concern, maybe even regret. "I know things have been difficult, and I want you to know you don't have to do this alone." I swallowed, surprised. My mother's love had always come wrapped in a tough exterior, practical advice, more than gentle consolation. She was the woman who raised me to be strong, who never let me cry for too long, who believed in resilience above all else. Yet here she was, offering something different, an olive branch. "What do you mean?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, maybe it's time for you to come home. Let me help you." The offer floated between us like a fragile glass ornament, beautiful but delicate. I wanted to reach for it, but fear held me back. How much had I changed? Would I be able to go back to the home that raised me, or had I outgrown it like a pair of old shoes? "I'm not sure I'm ready," I said honestly. "That's okay." For the first time in months, I felt safe to breathe. Those weeks were a turning point. My mother wasn't just there to help with the baby, she was there to listen. Really listen. One evening, as Ava slept in her crib and the house settled into a quiet lull, we sat together in the living room, teacups warming our hands. "Julia," she said softly, "I know I haven't always been the mother you needed." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I saw a vulnerability I hadn't expected. "But I want to be part of your story now, if you'll let me." Tears spilled down my cheeks as I nodded. The distance between us felt smaller, not erased, but bridged. "I want that too," I whispered. Back home, Mark was changing too slowly but unmistakably. The therapy sessions forced us to confront our failings and hopes to speak words that had been bottled up too long. He began waking for nighttime feedings, fumbling awkwardly but with determination through diaper changes, humming lullabies that sometimes made Ava smile. He read books on parenting and postpartum care. He asked how I was and waited for my answers. One night, as Ava slept peacefully between us, he turned to me. "I want to be better," he said quietly. "Not just for you, but for Ava. For us." I looked at him and saw something new, a willingness, a humility that had been buried beneath pride and ignorance. "I want that too," I said. But healing is never linear. There were days when the past shadows crept back, when I felt overwhelmed by the sheer weight of motherhood, by the slow unraveling of who I'd been. When the silence of nights felt like an endless abyss and the fatigue was a prison. Yet with every faltering step, I remembered that I was no longer alone. I was learning that strength isn't in silence, but in the courage to speak, to ask, to claim space. I was a mother, yes, but also a woman reclaiming her voice. The late afternoon sun filtered softly through the kitchen window, casting long shadows over the cluttered table where my laptop sat open. Ava was asleep in her crib nearby, her tiny chest rising and falling with gentle breaths, a fragile reminder of the life I was fighting to protect. But today, my focus was elsewhere, on the glowing screen in front of me, filled with rows of numbers, dates, and transactions. Our bank statements, every penny accounted for, or so I thought. I'd been meaning to check the finances for weeks, but between nursing Ava, sleepless nights, and the emotional fog that clung to me like a second skin, it had been pushed to the bottom of my to-do list. But today, some quiet urgency urged me forward. Maybe it was a flicker of unease I could no longer ignore. My eyes scanned the figures carefully, fingers trembling slightly, as I moved the cursor across the page. When Mark walked in that evening, his face tired but habitual, I was waiting. I closed the laptop slowly and looked at him. "We need to talk." He frowned, suspicion flickering in his eyes. I swallowed hard and met his gaze. "Why didn't you tell me about these debts?" His jaw tightened. "It's complicated. I didn't want to worry you." "Worry me?" I echoed, voice trembling. You've been funneling money away to pay off your debts behind my back, while insisting I go back to work as if I'm the problem here. His expression hardened. You're being selfish. The baby was our idea, I said quietly, feeling the sting of words I hadn't said aloud before. But I'm the one bleeding, the one awake every night. And you're calling me selfish. He stood up, voice rising. You're the one who needs to pull your weight. I'm busting my ass working full time, and you expect a medal for staying home. The room felt colder, the distance between us widening with every bitter word. I looked away, the tears finally spilling down my cheeks. I'm not your enemy, he sneered. Maybe not. But you're sure? Making it hard to be your partner? That night, after Mark went to bed, I sat in the darkened living room holding Ava close. Her warmth against my chest was the only comfort in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar and hostile. I began quietly packing a bag, clothes for me, diapers and blankets for her. I wasn't running away. Not yet. I was gathering strength. Because I realized that if I didn't protect myself and Ava soon, I might lose everything, including the fragile self I was trying to rebuild. The words still echoed in my mind, harsh, unforgiving, and devastating. You're being selfish. You're a burden. The baby was your idea anyway. Mark's voice had dropped to a low, venomous whisper, but the impact was like a sledgehammer against my chest. I stared at him, feeling the sting of tears rising behind my eyelids, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. Not in this house that had suddenly become a battlefield. That afternoon was one of the darkest in a long, unrelenting stretch of exhaustion and heartache. Ava had been crying for hours, and my attempts to soothe her felt like whispers against a storm. Every feed, every diaper change, every sleepless night seemed to pile up on me, and instead of support, I got accusations and disdain. Mark had always been distant in the weeks after Ava was born, but this was different. This was cold, calculated, a deliberate wound. The man I thought I'd married, the one who once cradled my belly and whispered promises, was nowhere to be found. His anger wasn't just aimed at me, it was lashing out at the changes motherhood had brought to his carefully constructed life. He was scared, scared of losing control, scared of the new responsibilities that came with a tiny human who needed everything. But his fear didn't excuse the cruelty. I felt my body tense as I searched for words, any words that could bridge the chasm widening between us. But my voice caught my throat, closing tight. You don't get to say that I finally managed, voice brittle but steady. You don't get to make me feel like I'm the problem here. He sneered, stepping closer. The problem is you're not pulling your weight. I'm out there busting my ass all day and you expect to be rewarded for sitting on your ass at home. I looked away, biting the inside of my cheek to stop myself from screaming, crying, breaking. In that moment, I realized that Mark wasn't just angry. He was lashing out at his own guilt and helplessness. He didn't know how to be the partner I needed. He didn't know how to share the load emotionally or physically. And instead of admitting it, he pushed me away. That night after Mark went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with Ava nestled in my arms. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the baby monitor. I felt the weight of the day pressing down on me, the exhaustion, the pain, the loneliness. I began to pack a bag. Not out of anger or haste, but out of necessity. A bag that symbolized my choice to protect myself and my daughter. A bag that carried hope for a future where we might find peace. I folded clothes carefully, soft onesies, blankets, diapers, essentials for a life not yet fully imagined. As I packed, memories flooded me the moment I found out I was pregnant, the joy, the fears, the dreams, and the slow unraveling that followed the feeling of being invisible in my own home. I wasn't running away, I was stepping forward, taking back control of my life and my story. I glanced at Ava sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storms around her. I promised myself that no matter what, I would fight to give her a life filled with love, respect, and safety, starting with protecting myself. The next morning, I found Mark in the kitchen, his usual confident demeanor softened by tiredness. "I'm leaving," I said, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked up surprised, then angry. "You can't just walk out." "I can. And I will if things don't change." He slammed his fist on the table. "You're being ridiculous." "No," I said, meeting his gaze for the first time that morning. "I'm being brave." With that, I gathered Ava in her stroller and walked out the door, leaving behind the house that no longer felt like home. The days that followed were hard, lonely, uncertain. But they were mine. I stayed with Rachel, who welcomed us with open arms and endless patience. Her presence was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Mark reached out sporadically, his messages a confusing mix of apologies and demands. I kept my distance, focusing on healing and reclaiming my strength. Every day I grew stronger, more certain. The woman who left that house wasn't the woman who would return, not until the scales of love and respect were balanced, and I was ready to fight for that. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of fabric and the distant hum of city life filtering through the cracked window. I sat on the edge of the guest bed at Rachel's house, Ava asleep in her portable crib nearby. My hands trembled slightly as I zipped up a duffel bag, clothes for both of us, diapers, a few toys, the essentials for a life paused, but not forgotten. This wasn't just packing. It was a declaration. I was leaving. Not in anger, not in haste, but with deliberate resolve. I was stepping away from a life that had begun to suffocate me. I was claiming space for myself and my daughter's, space where love wasn't conditional and respect wasn't withheld. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, but beneath it lay a fierce ember of hope. Hope that by leaving I might find a way back to myself. The quiet before the storm. It was Mark's birthday. Ironically, the night I finally packed my bag. He was out with friends, celebrating as if nothing had shifted between us. The house was cold when I returned from the nursery with Ava, the weight of solitude settling around me like a thick fog. I looked at our bedroom door, the place that had been once a sanctuary and now felt like a cage. I thought of the many nights I had curled up beside him, holding my pain close, swallowing my fears, pretending everything was fine. Tonight, I would no longer pretend. I gathered a few personal things: my favorite journal, a book of poetry, my worn but beloved leather jacket. Each item felt like a piece of my old self, the woman I used to be before motherhood swallowed me whole. Leaving was not easy. Walking out that door was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I held Ava tightly, feeling her warmth and softness against my chest. She was oblivious to the storm raging inside me, blissfully unaware of the fracture in our family. I didn't tell Mark I was leaving. There was no dramatic confrontation, no yelling, no pleading. Just silence, heavy and final. Rachel met me at the doorstep with open arms and tears in her eyes. "You're safe now," she whispered. And for the first time in months, I believed it. A new reality. The first few days in Rachel's home felt unreal. I was both exhausted and electrified, as if I were waking from a long nightmare, but uncertain if it was truly over. Rachel was a steady presence, helping with Ava, cooking meals, reminding me to eat and rest. But the nights were the hardest. When Ava slept, the house was too quiet. The absence of Mark's presence, or more accurately, his absence, echoed in the empty spaces. I grappled with the guilt of leaving. Was I abandoning my family? Was I failing as a mother, a wife? But then I remembered the nights I spent alone with a screaming baby, the days I bore silent insults, the moments I felt invisible. I realized I wasn't running away. I was running toward survival. Mark's arrival. It didn't take long before Mark found us. One afternoon, while I was rocking Ava to sleep, Rachel's phone buzzed with a message. "It's him," she said softly. I wasn't surprised, but my heart raced. Minutes later, Mark stood in the doorway of the guest room, tired, remorseful, but steady. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. I looked at him guarded. I came to talk, to listen, to try. The confrontation. We sat across from each other, a coffee table and miles of unspoken words between us. I know I failed you, Mark began. I didn't realize how deep the damage was. I thought working hard was enough. Working hard isn't the same as being present, I replied. You were here, but not really. And when I needed you most, you weren't. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I want to make it right, but I don't know how. Start by listening, I said. By understanding that love isn't just about money or effort, it's about respect. It's about partnership. He reached out hesitantly, and I took his hand. That moment felt fragile and hopeful, a tiny crack in the wall between us. Rebuilding slowly. Over the following weeks, Mark stayed with us. The change wasn't immediate, but it was consistent. He helped with feedings, changed diapers, and sat with Ava when I needed rest. More importantly, he started talking, really talking, about his fears, his failures, and his hopes. Therapy sessions became a shared space, a place where we could be honest without judgment. Finding my voice again. While Mark worked on being a better father and partner, I began to find my voice again. I reconnected with writing a lifeline I thought I had lost. Each word I typed was an act of defiance and healing. I wrote about motherhood, identity, love, and loss, the tangled mess that is real life. Through writing, I reclaim myself. The road ahead. Healing is a journey, not a destination. There were still moments of doubt, of pain, of fear. But with each step, I grew stronger. I realized that choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. For me, for Ava, for whatever future awaited us. Final thoughts. Leaving was not the end. It was the beginning. A beginning of reclaiming my worth, my voice, my life. And in that, I found freedom. The knock at the door was unexpected, sharp against the quiet that had settled over Rachel's living room like a fragile veil. It came just as the late afternoon sun was dipping low, casting long, melancholy shadows across the soft carpet and the scattered baby toys. The golden light filtered through the curtains, falling in dappled patches on the worn armchair where I sat cradling Ava, who was gently drifting into sleep. For a moment, the scene felt serene, almost sacred. But the knock shattered the calm. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not Mark. My heart leapt into my throat, a wild, frantic beat that sent shockwaves through my chest. Part of me wanted to run to lock the door to protect the fragile cocoon Rachel's home had become. But another part, the part I had fought to reclaim, whispered that I needed to face him, to confront whatever this was, to reclaim control over the narrative. I rose slowly, Ava still nestled in the crook of my arm, and walked to the door. Rachel was behind me, a quiet but steadfast presence. I glanced back at her, and she nodded, a gentle encouragement that steadied my trembling resolve. I opened the door. There he stood. Mark. Tired, older than when I'd last seen him, the lines around his eyes sharper, the shoulders heavier. But his eyes. Those eyes held a new weight. A mix of regret, vulnerability, and something I hadn't seen in a long time, hope. Julia, he said softly, his voice breaking the stillness. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. Come in. He stepped inside cautiously, as if entering unfamiliar territory. The room was cozy and warm, filled with the soft signs of Ava's presence. The pastel-colored toys, the neatly folded blankets, the faint scent of lavender from the diffuser in the corner. This wasn't the home we'd built together, but it was where I had found refuge. Mark glanced around, his gaze lingering on Ava's crib, then back to me. I know you're upset. He began, running a hand through his hair nervously. I want to make things right. Not just with words, but with actions. Rachel stood quietly by the kitchen doorway, her eyes steady and supportive. She had been my rock through the darkest days, and her silent presence reminded me I wasn't alone. Mark lowered himself into the chair opposite me, his posture tentative, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. I've been thinking a lot about what you said about respect partnership and what it means to really be present, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I realize now I was wrong. I was wrong to push you to dismiss your pain. I want to do better. For you. For Ava. His voice faltered. The words hung in the air between us, fragile and raw. I studied him carefully, searching for the truth beneath the surface. Was this genuine remorse? Or was it another plea to pull me back before the cracks widened irreparably? Before I could answer, he continued, I know I can't undo the past. I can't erase the nights I ignored your cries or the moments I made you feel invisible. But I hope you'll give me a chance, a real chance to prove I've changed. The air thickened with tension and cautious hope. I felt Ava stir in my arms, her tiny hand grasping at my shirt, grounding me in the present. I took a deep breath, steadying the storm inside. I'm willing to try, I said slowly, but on my terms. This time, I'm not the only one carrying the weight. Mark nodded solemnly. I understand. The beginning of reckoning. That night, we talked for hours. Not just about the past and the pain, but about the future. Fragile, uncertain, yet filled with the possibility of healing. Mark admitted to me the fears he had never voiced, his anxiety about fatherhood, his feelings of inadequacy, the pressure he'd felt to be the provider while struggling to navigate a world that suddenly demanded so much more from him. He spoke of Judith, his mother, and the toxic standards she set, expectations that suffocated rather than supported. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Mark had been trapped in a cycle of inherited pain passed down through generations, and I was caught in its wake. I shared my own vulnerabilities, the overwhelming loneliness, the crushing exhaustion, the ache of feeling unseen even in the arms of the man I loved. Our words tangled and clashed, but beneath it all was a mutual yearning, a desire to rebuild, to rediscover, to reconnect. The ghosts of the past. The next days were filled with silent reckonings. Memories surfaced, unbidden moments when I had felt small and insignificant, times I had swallowed tears so Mark wouldn't feel guilty. Nights I had wished for a partner who would simply be there. I remembered the nights Mark fell asleep with headphones in the mornings when he'd rush out without a word, the endless conversations where I had been told to toughen up or get over it. Each memory was a ghost haunting the present but also lighting the path forward. I began to understand that healing wouldn't erase the past. It wouldn't be a simple undoing of damage. It was about facing those ghosts, acknowledging their power, and choosing not to be defined by them. Mark and I began therapy together, a tentative step toward breaking patterns that had threatened to tear us apart. Our counselor was patient but direct, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths. She reminded us that love is not enough without respect, communication, and mutual effort. Slowly, the walls we'd built around ourselves began to crumble. Rebuilding trust, brick by brick. Rebuilding trust was the hardest work either of us had ever done. It wasn't in grand gestures or dramatic apologies. It was in the small moments, Mark waking up in the middle of the night to soothe Ava's cries, the way he'd hold my hand during therapy sessions, his patient listening when I needed to speak. But it was also in the missteps, the moments he forgot, the days when old habits resurfaced, the times when frustration and exhaustion made him snap. We learned to forgive not just each other but ourselves. I learned to speak up without fear of judgment. Mark learned to listen without defensiveness. Together, we built a fragile but growing foundation. Ava, the center of our world. Throughout it all, Ava was the heart of our fragile new beginning. Her laughter became the soundtrack of our tentative healing. Her tiny hands pulling at Mark's shirt, her wide eyes looking up at him in trust, her soft coos and babbles breaking the silence between us. I watched Mark transform not into a perfect father or husband, but into a man willing to be vulnerable, willing to grow. and I found strength in that. The road ahead. Our journey was far from over. There were still days of doubt, of pain, of fear. But now we face them together. I realize that sometimes love isn't enough, that healing requires courage, that partnership demands work, and that reclaiming oneself as a mother, a woman, a partner is a revolution of the soul. A quiet hope. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Mark and I sat on the porch, Ava asleep between us. He took my hand, his grip warm and steady. "I don't know what the future holds," he said. "Neither do I replied, "but I want to face it with you. As equals." I squeezed his hand. In that moment, beneath the fading light, I felt a quiet hope. Not a promise of perfection, but a vow of presence. And sometimes that's enough. The days following Mark's arrival at Rachel's house were filled with a cautious tenderness. It was a delicate dance, each step measured, each word weighed. We were learning how to be two people who had been broken but wanted to heal together. Mark was no longer the man who dismissed my pain or demanded I rush back to work. He was present in ways small and profound, holding Ava during late-night feedings, making coffee for me in the morning, listening without judgment when I needed to talk. Yet beneath the surface, a storm still simmered. Trust once shattered does not mend quickly, and the scars of neglect and betrayal were still raw. One afternoon, we sat on the porch watching Ava play in the grass. The sun warmed our faces, but the tension between us was palpable. "I want to be better," Mark said quietly. "For you, for her." "I want that too," I replied. "But it has to be more than words." He nodded solemnly. "We have to rebuild every day, every moment." And so we did. The final chapter of our journey was not marked by grand gestures or dramatic revelations. It was quiet, a slow, steady unfolding of new patterns and possibilities, a gentle reclaiming of trust, love, and hope. Mark and I had come through the storm battered, changed, but stronger. The hard conversations, the therapy sessions, the moments of vulnerability had carved a new path for us. I learned that love is not just a feeling, but a daily choice. A commitment to show up even when it's hard, a willingness to listen, to forgive, to grow. Ava thrived in this new atmosphere. Her laughter filled our home like a song of renewal. And I, too, was healing. I had reclaimed my voice, my worth, and my space. The woman who once felt invisible was now seen by Mark, by Ava, and most importantly, by herself. As I rocked Ava to sleep one evening, I whispered, "We made it, baby girl. We made it." And in the quiet, I felt the promise of a new beginning. Subscribe to Grace's Truth. Share your own story in the comments. Your voice could be someone else's light. And remember, the quietest people often carry the loudest truths. Be brave enough to hear them.